Ciao friends! Let's see how to display data on injuries in different parts of the human body by using Power BI and Synoptic Panel. In this report, we see data about the frequency of injuries for MMA fighters, mixed martial arts fighters. And you see that we have many injuries in this sport, of course, and the visualization of the numbers that we see on the left side of this report, which are just numbers, percentages, is much more clear once we map these numbers into areas of the human body like you see in this side. Of course, because this is a Power BI, whenever we apply a filter, we change the selection, we see that everything changes in the report, including the information displayed in Synoptic Panel. Now, Synoptic Panel is this area, but Synoptic Panel doesn't have the human body. Synoptic Panel is just a generic visualization that can get any graphical element in a particular format I describe in a moment and display data in these elements by coloring areas that correspond to specific names in our data model. So what is the work needed to create this report? Well, first of all, we need a design of the human body, and this design must be exported in an SVG file. SVG is a very common format available in many design platforms for drawings, for vector drawings. And what we get is something that we can import, and let's go in Power BI Desktop, we can import in our Synoptic Panel. This is the visual Synoptic Panel that we created in this report, that we included in this report. And once we import this map, we have only a single map in this example. We could have multiple maps, but in this case, we only need one map for this particular use case. We have the drawing that represents the human body, as you can see here, but we have to create a mapping between the drawing and the data that we have in our data model. So this edit button enters into an editor for the mapping. So you need an editor for the SVG file, or you can translate into SVG one existing file in many other formats. There are thousands of tools to do the conversion, and you will find also information in the documentation. But what is important at this point, we have to evaluate how to create the corresponding matching between the element, the area in the SVG file and the corresponding name for a particular column in our data model. So this is done by doing what? You see that in this case we started with a file that is already mapped. In this case, the ID of each element I'm selecting in this side, you see that now I selected the lower back, which is this part, corresponds to the exact name that we have in a column in our data model. You can see this from the auto bind we set in the data point configuration. But you see that in this case, path 1, which is the head, has been mapped to the data point that is called head. So we can get a file that has been prepared with the names that we already have in our model, and at that point everything is automatic, very easy. You don't have to enter this dialog box. Or you can get a file that has not been prepared for your data model, and you can manually mapping all the objects by using this tool. Of course, if you have a reasonable low number of areas, this makes sense. If you have hundreds or thousands of areas, probably you want to find a way to automate the process, for example, by modifying the SVG file using a script, using Python, using some programming language. At the end of the day, the SVG file is a sort of HTML file, is an XML file with some tag similar to HTML. It's a particular language, but basically the ID we were talking about is something that you will find, for example, in this ID here. So this is one of the examples of one area is just described as a list of points and this ID. So is reasonable to think that when you have many data points, you might figure out a way to do the mapping in an automated way. Now, if you want to know more about how to create a similar representation of the data on the human body or something similar, you will find, in this particular case, an article on 𝗀𝗏𝗧𝗏's website, which actually explains how we created this report with more details about the actual work that has been done to create the mapping, how this report is used in the real world. We created a sample, but of course we have been inspired by actual real use cases that of course we cannot publish to the public because it's sensitive data, but of course we created the fictitious data that represent what we can do by using Synoptic Panel. So if you have a similar problem, or you know somebody that has a similar problem, now you can show what you can do by using Synoptic Panel and Power BI, and drop a comment and let us know what you think about your use case for this tool.